What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Celtics Talk Podcast here on the NBC Sports Boston Podcast Network. Coming up today, my buddy John Karalis. You might know him from the Locked On Podcast. He also works now at the Boston Sports Journal. You hear him on our post-game shows asking a bunch of questions. John, we're going to talk about where the Celtics are headed, that lingering traded player exception hanging over everything. What does John think is the best way to maximize that? And so much Robert Williams talk because, well, let's face it, this is a Robert Williams podcast and might want to just change the name to the Robert Williams Talk Podcast eventually. But all that coming up today on the Celtics Talk Podcast. All right, Karalis, I want to start here. Do you remember the first time we podcasted?
Oh, my God. No.
And that's completely understandable. I was trying to rack my brain tonight. I was actually hoping you had the answer because I want to say...
It was a long time ago.
It was, and that was why I was laughing about it because I think it was probably... I started covering this team. So I was around for the 2008 title, but like I was sort of in and out. I mostly did the playoffs. I came back as a full-timer at ESPN Boston and started covering the team in 2009, 2010 season. And I think it was around then. I remember I met you for the first time at the All-Star game in Dallas in 2010.
Okay.
That was that was a very vivid experience. But you were the OG, man. You were like, I know Jeff and the Celtics Stuff Live guys were around, but like you and Chuck were the first Celtics podcast. And I laugh about it now because I remember thinking back then, podcasting, this thing's never going to last, And so here we are in 2021, 11 years later, and closing out this home and home because you were nice enough to have me on your Locked On Celtics podcast right. A couple weeks ago. And ironically, we were talking about Harrison Barnes. All these weeks later, we're still talking about Harrison Barnes. We'll get to that. Right. I want to start here. The Celtics are about to launch into this 8 games in 12-day stretch. They're coming off a nice breezy win over the Rockets team that doesn't want to win games. What will we be saying at the end of this 8 games in 12-day stretch? How are we going to feel about the Celtics in 2 weeks?
I honestly don't think it's going to change much. I think we're going to be right where we are, where some people are going to be a little upset and some people are going to be like, no, it's not that bad. And I think this fight is just going to continue on until the playoffs because I think Brad Stevens really does have this long-term plan. And he always has this long-term plan. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's told me about the marathon of the season a dozen times in the past couple of years. And I think he's just not going to sacrifice, especially with that stretch of 5 games in 7 days. He's not gonna do anything to jeopardize the big final run, which means a couple of games with no Kemba in there, which might even mean at this point a game without Jaylen Brown to rest his knee. I mean, he played Jaylen 40 minutes against Brooklyn, which I thought was a little much. And I just think that as long as they're playing better, we're going to get a big process over results kind of stretch here where he's going to say, look, we played well. Some shots didn't fall. They played great. Give them credit, blah, blah, blah. The same thing we hear after every post game. And then at the end, people are going to be screaming. And the closer we get to that trade deadline, because that falls like right in the middle of that stretch, like we're just going to start hearing from everybody. The calls for Danny to do something are going to get louder. The calls for his head when he does like Terrence Ross as his move are going to be like, what is he doing? We need more than this. So I don't know.
But that's a good segue. Do they need more than Terrence Ross? Let's dive into to what will Danny do?
I heard you and Ryan talking about it, and I thought that Ryan is pretty spot on. Like my take has been they need to do something, not necessarily just because they need to make a run for it right now. I think mostly they need to do something to reward the guys that have been working this season to show them that we're behind you. Say, this is the weirdest season you guys will ever play, maybe aside from the end of last season, but the way everything's condensed, you're working, you're not practicing, you're being asked to do all of these crazy COVID related things. We're going to make a move to show you that we're behind you. We're going to make a move to show Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in the long term, like, look, we've got a long-term plan. So we're not going to blow everything. We're not going to blow the whole TPE. We're not going to go into the tax right now because of all of the financial things that Ryan was talking about, which I think are correct. But here's like some help. So you guys don't have to play 40 minutes. Maybe you can play 36 minutes, and that's going to preserve you. And then when the playoffs come, you guys can really shine and do what you do. So that's the type of thing that I think he needs to do. And plus, I think if it can include Tristan Thompson, and it's a salary matching thing where they preserve the TPE, then you allow for Daniel Tice and Robert Williams to split those center minutes. That kind of snaps the thing into place. I've compared it to like when you go to the eye doctor and he flips that little thing. He goes, a little better,
the focus, yeah.
And that little thing will just snap it. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a little bit better. It just moves everything into focus a little bit more.
Well, it's funny you say that because we spent a little time on our post-game show last night talking about, how does this center rotation shake out and who is the odd man out? I wonder, and I thought from the start of the year, I thought there was a chance that Tice didn't survive this season just because of the uncertainty after this year and whether you could resign him. Now, because Tristan hasn't exactly kicked the door down and been what they maybe necessarily thought, but he has had moments. So like, I think they're holding out hope that he can be that guy in the playoffs. And I know a lot of the core pieces of this team want to play with him. I think they still do have a tough decision here. If you go more single big, is there enough minutes? And clearly there's not. Like Tice has not played in 2 of the last 3 wins or whatever that they've gone small. So I don't know if there's an easy answer, but I also don't know if they can necessarily move one of those guys. But the right deal comes along, you get a 4-man who has some versatility to play the 5. Maybe that makes it easier. So we're already starting to hear some of these buyout candidates' names start coming up. PJ Tucker obviously not playing the other night. Somehow the Celtics are linked to LaMarcus Aldridge, which I don't understand, but that continues to be. Do any of these names? Do they move you at all?
No, not well. Okay, in a trade, no, not at all, not at all. LaMarcus Aldridge is the dumbest one. Literally no justification for blowing your traded player exception on LaMarcus Aldridge, who's old and slow and is in the final year of his contract. Like you can't even say he's got 1 more year left and we're going to take him on as an expiring. And he essentially is another TPE in a human form that's going to sit at the end of our bench. So you don't have any of that. I think when Danny Ainge brought in Tristan Thompson, part of it was he's giving Tristan Thompson, he didn't care about the hard cap because he's operating with the luxury tax line. So the hard cap didn't mean anything to Danny Ainge, in my opinion. And so that 9.2 plus million salary is a really nice salary to match. So I always thought that Tristan Thompson now could be a salary matching type of contract. And if he plays well, great. So if he goes out, then you keep Tice, you keep Robert Williams, and then you just scan the buyout market for whomever that is willing to come in and say, look, you're the third guy. You're there in case Robert's hip goes off or if the matchup just doesn't work for Daniel Tice. But more likely than not, you're going to get a DNP. Is that going to be LaMarcus Aldridge? No. Is that going to be Andre Drummond? No. But look, I don't want to be anywhere near Andre Drummond. But if he accepts that role, then sure, at a veteran minimum, so what? And if he starts crying about it, you cut him. But I think there's probably some kid in the G League that's big and can sit at the end of the bench and give you 10 minutes if you need it. Like that's the type of thing, or anybody at that point, because it's a break glass in case of emergency type of situation. So on the buyout market, I really don't even care who it is.
Did you see when Ryan suggested that it should be Hassan Whiteside being the third center? I nearly fell out of my chair.
That one hurt my feelings, but because I hate him as a player.
Oh, I thought you meant Ryan. Okay, go ahead.
No, I dislike Ryan. No, Ryan's great. I haven't disliked a player as much as I dislike Hassan Whiteside since Mark Blount played. That's how much I dislike Hassan Whiteside. And even him on a buyout, it doesn't matter. Like, as much as I'm like scream from the rooftops, no Hassan Whiteside, because I don't think he's good. But if you get him for the veteran minimum, then he's, for the value is fine. So that's, I can't believe I'm forced to say these things, but yeah, Hassan Whiteside would be okay in that situation.
Wow. He's broke us all down.
Oh my God.
For those who
need to pause just so I can mend my broken heart.
This is where we are with the Celtics season, where we're left pondering these things. For those who
Danny Ainge. Okay.
For those who haven't heard, Ryan Bernardoni, our my favorite cap guru. We spent the last pod talking about, all the different avenues the Celtics can travel here, and trying to put together this mathematical puzzle. I really suggest you go check that out if you haven't heard it yet. Ryan thinks about things a little bit differently than I do, and is very good at sort of projecting out into the future and the difficulties the Celtics have. And I just thought it was a neat discussion, and it kind of, for the Celtics fans that are sitting here going, we all want them to use a little bit of it. And just as John laid out perfectly at the start here, to infuse some talent on this team, because for me, the window is open with Jaylen and Jason the way they played, but you need to get to the finish line of the season with them healthy, and you need to get them help so that you have at least a puncher's chance in what could be a wild playoffs because of everything going on. Let's spin it to our friends at PointsBet. Give odds for most improved player. Karalis, I'm not going to lie. I went there today hoping that they had added Robert Williams to the mix for the most improved player award. They have not yet. It is still right now Jeremy Grant up top at -209, Julius Randle at +400, Christian Wood at +500, and then Jaylen Brown still in the mix at +1,000. So I want to throw this out to you. I want to use this as a springboard as we get into my weekly Robert Williams segment. But Jaylen is most improved. I think that's a little bit faded, right? Like, and some of that's not his fault. It's just he started so hot, and now the knee and the Celtics struggle as a whole. I think that's going to cool a little bit. How do you feel about my suggestion that I think Robert Williams, I think he's already knocking on the door now. Could he muscle his way into the most improved category if his minutes continue to go up?
Yeah, I don't think he has the counting numbers to do it. That the statistically, and that's what everybody's going to look at. Statistically, he's just not going to have the case to make. Now, for people like us who have watched him over the past couple of years and know how much time he's missed, and that situation, like his rookie year when it was Al Horford and Aaron Baines that were hurt, and he was just sitting on that bench, like collecting dust when he should have been in the G League. I don't know how many people expected him to play this well and make the improvements that he's made over the course of this season. And I would think if I could lay out the case and do a TED talk with a TV, a monitor, and say, okay, look at all of these things that he does better now, people will be like, wow, he really has improved. Mm-hmm. And maybe I could convince somebody to give him, like, I don't know, do they do first, second, third place votes for this?
I think that
maybe so that's the type of case you would have to make. Like, you and I could sit here and craft a PowerPoint presentation that would kick ass.
Do you want me to go get mine? Like, I have all sorts of Rob Williams graphics ready to go. So,
but I think that the fact that we feel like we can make a strong case for him to at least be in the conversation just goes to show how well he's done. And I broke down that first quarter after the game, and I just looked at all the little things that he did. The ball movement, catching the ball in the middle of the lane and knowing right away exactly okay, this guy's already closing in on me. There's Peyton Pritchard. Boom. Peyton swings it over to Shemi, and that's a three. That is just a very decisive Robert Williams play where he's just reacting well on the floor. The backdoor pass to Marcus Smart, I watched that GIF on a loop and just like, oh my God.
It's a crazy pass. Crazy pass that I think Scal described in the broadcast. He said, that's a play that happens 20 times a game, but the passer isn't good enough to get the ball there. Like, right. The defense was great. The pass was better.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And look, for the Celtics, who are not a cutting team, they have no cutters. First of all, now Marcus Smart's back, and he reads things, and you're like, oh, great. A backdoor cut. That's amazing. And for Rob to hit him with that, seriously, it took me an extra 5 minutes to write my story last night because I was watching that thing on a loop going, oh my God, it's just so beautiful. And then the defensive awareness where he's the guy that's communicating to the players and bailing out Jeff Teague on a play and actually directing Marcus Smart to go back to the right guy on a critical stop early in that first quarter run. And then after that, on the same play, being behind the play and just letting Victor Oladipo know that if you do get past Semi Ojeleye, I'm here to just steal your soul with a block shot. And Oladipo just danced at the top of the key and jacked up a fadeaway three. So all of that for Robert Williams is just amazing, amazing progression. So I wish that there was a portal where I can contribute all of this stuff with you to make the case, but he certainly needs to be appreciated because a lot of these improvements normally just come with the minutes on the floor. And that just goes to show you how much he was able to work and how much he was paying attention and how much he could process over the course of the bubble and that short off season to come into camp this season and be whatever, as good as he's been.
I always tread cautiously here because, health has been a concern with the Time Lord. And my fear is always that all this momentum is going to get stunted by, even the most minor of injury setbacks. But I do think there's a lot to be encouraged by. And I do think this again shows the value of just putting your rookies on the floor or your young players on the floor and letting them play through mistakes. Because even at the start of the season, we were saying, Robert Williams just isn't in the right spots enough defensively. Well, when you get a hook 1 minute after being out of position, it's hard to go kind of keep your confidence up. And I don't get the sense that Rob is the type of guy that really hung his head, but he certainly had to be sitting there and thinking, man, year 3, and I played over 20 minutes 8 times coming into the year. It's got to be frustrating. Now, some of that is on him with the health. And, but I think the progress has been remarkable in terms of if you just took a vacuum and said, which players in the NBA have taken their games and their skills to another level? We can fixate on the stats. Is Jeremy Grant that much better, or is it partly the situation?
Right.
Rob is here is gone from a guy where you didn't feel comfortable playing him to really kind of pushing the issue here with how Brad Stevens uses him and should he be a starter. I'm curious your thoughts on that because I think that the rumbles are starting to grow louder. And part of it is Rob is just so different. And when you see the per 36 lines he's putting up, 6 blocks the other night against the Nets in 17 minutes. Last night, double in under 20. Do you think, doesn't matter. I guess we'll start there. We know Brad Stevens' answer. Doesn't matter who starts, matter who's finished. We've seen some crunch time, Lord, but does Rob deserve more run and consideration with that first group?
Yes, he does. So this brings us back to the Tristan Thompson conversation because you need Tristan Thompson to play. If you're going to get any value from him, you need him to go out and have that 13 rebound night. And so you start double bigs because even against the Houston team where Brad Stevens knows going into this game, this is going to be a tough night for the double bigs. Let's see how it goes. And then 6 minutes into it, he says, okay, Daniel Tice, sit down, go take a shower, put on your suit, just chill on the bench, be a coach. And that's okay because the Celtics could do that against Houston. I did kind of get on the Celtics for coming out a little lazy, but the matchup thing was also part of the problem. So you do that knowing that you're going to get Robert Williams the minutes behind him. And if Rob's cool with that for now, then this is how it's got to be. And then maybe the trade deadline is going to fix things. But Brad Stevens did say after the game, we're getting to a point here where it's not going to be like this. One of these guys is just not going to play as much.
We're going to be in this situation more now where one of those guys isn't playing as much as we're smaller, and it won't be the same guys every night because it'll be matchup dependent and kind of who's going. But all 3 are good players, and Rob obviously gives us an upside there that I think we just need to keep building and building and building.
And look, he's also had injuries which have been a problem, but also have allowed for all 3 bigs to play. When Marcus Smart is ready to play those 30 minutes and start, that's just going to go away. So then Brad has to make a decision. Who do you start with? And at that point, I think Rob can certainly make a case, even if he's only playing the 20 to 25 minutes. Again, Stevens acknowledged that. He said, like, his history, especially last year, we want to be very cautious. That tells you that the hip is a problem still. And maybe he doesn't feel it, maybe it doesn't hurt, but they're afraid of it. And structurally, maybe he just has a persistent issue that's going to show up in his hip. So that might mean we only get forever 25 minutes of Robert Williams, and it's just going to be how we're going to use him or whatever. I don't know how they're going to manage that. But that also means that forever, if Robert Williams is on this team, you're going to need a second center that's good, that can help and is good enough to play the other 20 plus minutes, but also not so good that he makes a claim for 38 minutes. So that's kind of why I like Daniel Tice. I think a Daniel Tice, Robert Williams dynamic would work very well, because Tice gives you the popping ability and does a few other things. And I think that, like, almost like a fastball changeup kind of dynamic between the two. So yeah, I'd love to see Robert Williams play with the starters. I'd love to see him be able to give that vertical threat and really probably make Kemba Walker's life a lot easier, which in turn would make Jaylen and Jason's lives easier. And all you need now is one more guy. And that's, if it's Marcus Smart, or if it's player that they traded for and they move Marcus Smart to the bench, however that works out, that works out. But yeah, more Time Lord would be great. I just hope that the hip is not so problematic that we never get as much as we want.
It's a fascinating conversation. It's not, and I just don't think it's at the point where we have to push the issue. It's not like Rob sitting there saying, I want him to be the starter, but his play certainly screams. I'm so intrigued to see more time alongside the Jays. I haven't looked at the numbers recently. I know last year Rob played really well when he was out there with Jaylen and Jason, and I just think it adds a dynamic that offense sort of needs. Now, all that being said, I think Kemba and Tice have great chemistry. There is a world where, Tice is back next season, and you could have that 2-man 1-2 punch with Rob and Tice, on a manageable number, but that does require them to figure out something with Tristan. I do think there's a little bit of a fear too of you bringing this guy. He's your sort of big offseason splash, if you want to call it that, and then you move him right back out. Like, Tristan doesn't want to get traded to some Siberia again. He just spent all that years in Cleveland in the post LeBron. So, they gotta navigate that delicately, and I'll be interested to see how it plays out, because I think we understand, they need to probably thin that thing out a little bit. One quibble with the Time Lord. He's just so, because, and it's like both a positive and a negative. Whenever he gets the ball or rebound, his first instinct is to push it so much that he often rushes the first pass.
Yes.
And somewhat to a fault. Like, okay, the other night against the Rockets, he was falling down and he had to shovel it, which was fine. That you have to do that. You're going to travel if you hit the floor. So and it was amazing play to both collect it and move it. But there are times when he'll get a very basic rebound, and poor Peyton Pritchard just gets hits with a bullet from 3 feet away. And they're like, Rob, just, look up a little bit. You don't have to move it that quickly. So I want to see him develop that patience and get that going. But
I would rather somebody dial it back than try to get that aggressiveness out. So that is a fixable problem, but it's also a hilarious problem because some of those passes that he tries to make are just outright funny.
But he is the Dime Lord, so we will allow him to play through those mistakes. So I think you wrote something the other day about Lonzo Ball, and this has been one of my favorite topics as we sort of transition back to TP talk, because that's what people want to hear. And besides Time Lord talk, which I want to hear. Lonzo's super intriguing to me. Really any of the I have never gone into a trade deadline where I thought trading for a restricted free agent is good business. Typically bringing in a guy, especially going into a off season that is going to be replete with cash and spenders, is a dangerous thing to navigate. But in the absence, if you are trying to add impact talent without, sacrificing this traded player exception or preserving as much of it as you can, a guy like Lonzo is super intriguing to me because it's something you need: size at the point guard position, passing. His 3-point shot is obviously. Where do you stand on the idea of whether it's him, Josh Hart? I mean, I think John Collins is far less likely, but do you like the idea of a restricted addition?
Yeah, I don't mind a restricted edition. I'll echo what Ryan said the other day, which was depends on the price. But my interest in Lonzo isn't even necessarily a long-term interest. It bridges the Celtics to where they need to go in terms of a Bradley Beal pursuit. Because I really feel like after listening to Tatum and Beal at the All-Star game and how much they just loved being on the same team. I mean, they were really excited about being on the same team. It was just an all-star team. They might have been on the floor for 5 minutes together. But to hear how much they want to play together makes me think like, damn, Danny Ainge really needs to go get Bradley Beal. Because even if Beal doesn't really want to leave, and I applaud his loyalty to a Wizards team that has just been a debacle in the front office, even if he's that loyal, if Jason Tatum says, hey man, we got the pieces, we can do it, you just need to say, trade me. Like that might be the one place where he goes, okay, sure. I'll either stay here or go play with Jason. So Lonzo Ball, he is obviously young. He's a restricted free agent. So he's still on his rookie contract. If you can get to Boston and play well and re-sign at a reasonable price, that is a good salary matching start and a good young player that Washington can be like, well, we can build around this guy. He can be a good piece to our future. Like imagine him playing with Thomas Bryant and, imagining the spacing with him and Bertans. And like if you can get them to talk themselves into that, now you've got the pieces. And that's why you don't trade away a ton of picks, because Lonzo Ball plus picks plus Romeo plus Peyton Pritchard, like that package now starts to be like at least intriguing to the Wizards. And so that's why I'm interested in Lonzo Ball more than anything. But in the meantime, he can really fit because the Celtics do need a ball mover. The Celtics do need somebody that can hit backdoor cuts. They do need somebody that can defend. And he, with Tatum and Brown and Smart, can be, maybe the best. You throw Robert Williams there, that could be one of the best defensive lineups in the league. So switchable, so versatile. And then his strength is out in transition. And boy, the Celtics really need to get out into transition a lot more, And so I think in the short term, he can help with a lot. And I don't think he's a max player. So you do run the risk, though, of teams flush with cash saying, you know what, we do see that side of him, and we're going to give him that max contract. And now Danny Ainge has another acquisition that goes away, and that really becomes a problem. So it's risky, but I like it in the short term. And if it can become the centerpiece of a Bradley Beal move, then the Celtics have to do something like that. But I'm mostly thinking when you scan the free agent market, when you scan the trade market, I'm really thinking ahead towards how do they get Bradley Beal and get that third star and then go from there. And if that means you have to move Kemba at some point, then it sucks because I like Kemba, but this is the NBA and this is the business of it.
Yeah. And that's where I come down on it too, is that we can sit here all day and be like, it's tough optically after what you happened with Isaiah, and then to recruit this and Kyrie's on a whole different sort of world there, but to then have to move on from Kemba this quickly, it just, I don't think they thought when they brought in Kemba that the Jays would ascend this quickly, that it was like he was going to nurture them and pass that baton eventually. But Jason doing it last year, then Jaylen going this year, all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, is this small point guard who doesn't necessarily create as nicely as maybe another version would and set those guys up? So I look, the jury's still out on that. Perk went on this rant last night and, sort of said he's not the third star they need. I don't think anyone's disputing that. The fit might not be perfect. And it's why the Celtics have to examine options moving forward. It's kind of the reason I like the Lonzo Ball thing. You get another point guard in here, you're like, okay, how does this look when it's just Lonzo and the Jays out there? And, does it give Kemba a little bit of motivation? Like, hey, they bring in this guy now. So, it all does come down to price point though. And I've been told that the price tag on Josh Hart is super high. So, and it's probably Josh Hart's probably not going to move because the Pelicans seem to think that he's a part of their future. Lonzo's a little bit more complicated because I don't know if they have the means and the resources to re-sign him at, with Ingram and obviously, trying to keep open money to nurture that core. But if they were willing to move him for the right amount of first round picks and young talent for Lonzo Ball, I think you have to think about it. And again, I know the risk involved. There'd be some means of recouping. You could do a sign and trade after this year. That's never guaranteed, as the Boston Celtics understand better than anybody. So, you just have to keep those things in mind. But I'm a little bit more agreeable to it than I would have been in the past, if nothing more than to infuse a bit of talent this year and figure it all out after the year. You sort of look at your 10,000 foot view of your roster and say, okay, what's the plan with Kemba? What's the plan with these restricted guys? And that's a difficult puzzle. But if you also had the TP in that mix, it's intriguing. Let's circle back. Any other TP guys jump out to you? I feel like, again, to bring this conversation full circle, I made we've said why it's difficult and cumbersome for someone like a Harrison Barnes, but at the right price, would you do it?
I think there's still value to doing that. Like there's value to a lot of these options. Like bringing in Harrison Barnes now it's not like a move that you say, oh my God, no. Like we're trying to guess and fill in blanks because we're not in those meetings with Rick Grossbeck and we don't know exactly what Danny Ainge is thinking. We're just trying to kind of scan the landscape and go, okay, that looks interesting. So yeah, I think Harrison Barnes can work because also, he's flippable at some point. His contract is descending, right. And you say you bring him in. If Danny Ainge looks across the landscape and says this is our best option, and we can move out enough salary where we stay underneath the luxury tax, so it doesn't hurt us there, then sure, why not? Because he helps now. He does fit. Like as our opinions evolve throughout all of this, we can't forget the arguments that we've made in the past where Harrison Barnes does fit. Like he does tick off a lot of boxes, and he can be that small ball five in certain situations. He can be a good defender, switchable defender. He's still young. He obviously can shoot extraordinarily well. Like he does a lot of things that the Celtics need. The real question as this all evolves is, does he put them over the top? Is it worth going into the tax for him? And if it's not, then can the Celtics do enough to move out of that and still be okay for future moves? And so if they can get Harrison Barnes, get away from the tax, if they can move, it would have to involve moving Tristan Thompson at this point. Can they do all of that stuff and be where they need to be after the trade? Then if that's the case and they use the TPE, then great, because then he just becomes a human TPE, like I said before, mm-hmm. And you trade him and he's a great salary match. But the more I've heard Danny Ainge talk, the less I think that that's something that is the move. Now, if we go Tristan Thompson and a young guy and a pick to Orlando for Aaron Gordon, and you save the TPE and Harrison Barnes is still around over the summer, and now you're adding Aaron Gordon and Harrison Barnes, is Kemba, Jaylen, Jason, Gordon, Barnes a lineup, or is one of those guys off the bench with Marcus Smart and Robert Williams as your starter? Like now you're getting deep and there's some talent there. Maybe that's enough. And maybe Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum take another step forward and they're first team all NBA guys. Now you don't have to make another move because mm-hmm. they're the two stars, and Barnes as a number 3 or Gordon as a number 3. That's pretty damn good. And if the ownership is willing to pay that amount of salary, then great. If you've reset the luxury tax and you're not going into the repeater in 2 years, then sure, go for it. There are many paths. This is very like Democrat Republican type of thinking, like two different distinct paths if you're trying to get to the same goal. I can see the argument for doing it a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's fascinating to me. I love the little choose your own adventure part of this. Like, you know, just like you said, the goal is like it's an obvious goal. Put as much talent around the Jays as possible for as long as possible and make this a contender for as deep into the future as you can go. And every move has a sort of domino effect on the next move. And, you know, ultimately that's why I think the Celtics need to hone in. And it all comes back to what you said. How are you not only getting the most out of the Jays, but keeping them happy? And so if Jason Tatum ultimately just wants to play with Bradley Beal, the roadmap has to always be designed to leave open that potential. And I think they have done that. I think that's why they're treading cautiously with this. You know, part of it too is Sacramento's asking price for Harrison Barnes right now sounds pretty high. And I think the Celtics, if we all sit here and say, you know, if they could get it for a Romeo Langford or an Aaron Nesmith and a pick, you know, they probably consider it. But Sacramento sitting here asking for Marcus Smart, you know, they're not going to do that deal. No. So, you know, it just all comes down to that balance about, you know, what is actually available. And I know that's hard for fans who are just eager for a move, but it does. I'm not giving Danny Ainge any outs here. I think he has to do something before this trade deadline, you know, on some level. But the more he hints that it won't involve the TPE, the more I think we're all thinking the same thing here. It's probably going to be some bundle of either young talent or Tristan or Tice or whatever. And then you give yourself just that little wild card this offseason, which I don't love because I think there's some risk there when you're talking about teams know that thing's going to vaporize. So they can hold your feet to the fire a little bit more. So it's a little bit of a dangerous dance, but I do think there's ways to maximize this value and sort of put this team in position to be successful, not only now, but deeper into the future. And the Harrison Barnes talk isn't going anywhere because Sacramento visits on Friday night, right? So there's going to be no shortage. I'll have to get Draper to give me his latest updated outlook on how that's going. Let's wrap it up with this. Give me one thing you're super excited about this team. One thing that gives you hope that this team will be a contender when we get to the finish line of the season, and give me one thing that you're really concerned about that needs to change along that way.
The thing that gives me the most hope is Marcus Smart being back and just seeing the impact that he's had on this team. And you could throw Robert Williams in there, but just the stark contrast, and maybe it's not exactly fair because he came back and it's the first game after the All-Star break and the guys have more energy in general, but I've seen on the floor the impact that he's had. Just, I keep talking about organizing this team. Marcus Smart's organizing of this team is huge. And when you see him very demonstratively pointing to, you go here, you go there, yelling last night, you can hear him yelling to Peyton Pritchard when Robert Williams is setting the pick, use it, use it, use it. Like he's directing guys on the floor in so many ways that we don't see. That when we say heart and soul of the team, like that's not just platitudes. This is Marcus Smart is out there on the floor. He sees things that other people don't. And being on the floor, he can direct these younger guys and help them make the right plays that they aren't making on their own. And that is such a big problem from, when you look through February, we can go to every game and be like, if Marcus Smart came in here, this game would have changed. And you could do that throughout most of those losses. So that gives me the most hope. What gives me the most fear? Jaylen Brown's knee. Mm-hmm. That is, they obviously he's still playing and he's fine, and he had just a magnificent, second quarter in that game against Houston. Like he was just like superstar level play for 11 minutes. But I would just say maybe the injuries in general, if the Celtics can't get everybody together and have just a good run of everybody being healthy and on the floor together, then it's just never going to happen for these guys. But if they can get Smart and Jaylen and Kemba, like whatever ends up ailing Smart, it's always something here and there. If Jaylen's knee can be managed and is okay, and I look, tendonitis always scares me because like I still have knee tendonitis. Like it can be a chronic thing, and if it's not managed properly, it can be problematic. So it always scares me. Kemba's knee seems fine, but because of recent history, you just wonder. But if that stuff is all okay, and you can get Kemba and Jaylen and Jason and Marcus together on the floor and have them just extended for a couple of months, run together, and then if Danny Ainge does something to help that group, then you run into puncher's chance category because look, Kevin Durant's still not back for Brooklyn, and I know they're being super cautious, but I don't know. Who knows? If something doesn't go right there, then that's one less weapon, and we still haven't seen them with pressure exerted on them. And how does Kyrie, manage that pressure? How does that all work out? Like, it could work out fine. We just watched, Joel Embiid go down with an injury. That stuff happens. You still need to give the Celtics their puncher's chance, and maybe they're the one that goes on a Miami Heat run from last year. So, but they won't if the injuries persist.
Yeah. I mean, health is, it feels like if you could just script, if you asked me like next year on 2022, what would we be talking about over the final 6 weeks of the regular season? Like, it's the Celtics, so it's probably health. And it's not like it's just one guy. It used to be just like, oh, is Gordon Hayward going to be healthy? And now it's, is Tatum going to feel better further removed from COVID? Is Jaylen's knee going to hold up? Is Kemba's knee going to allow him to be who he can be? Will Marcus Smart have to be wrapped in bubble wrap to make sure he doesn't hurt something along the way? Rob Williams' hip. Romeo Langford, will he ever be? Like, we can do this whole game and go down the entire roster. It's kind of crazy. But I agree. I don't know if I keep saying this to people. I don't know if I have a full grasp on what this team is because we just haven't seen it. And then in 2 weeks, this could all change. Like, the dynamic could be very different in terms of who's playing more minutes and how the roster looks if they do make moves. I just think ultimately, end of the day, what keeps me coming back to being somewhat optimistic is that first 6 weeks of the season, the only thing that mattered was Jason and Jaylen playing at an all-star level and showing they could be the focal points of this team. And that happened. Now there's been extenuating circumstances and the team surely hasn't been as consistent. And there hasn't been a lot that has made me say, yeah, this is a surefire contender. But I do think they have the potential to get there. And I think the next few weeks will tell us a lot more about this team. I don't think, as you open this whole thing with, I don't know if we'll necessarily know the next, like, they're not going to rip off 8. They're not going to win all 8 games in this 12-day stretch. Like, that's just impossible because of the schedule and everything. But, can they go out and play and win a game against Utah Jazz and make us feel a little bit better? Probably. Right. So I'll be fascinated to see what happens these next couple of weeks. And on the March to May 16th, then the start of the playoffs. Before I get out of here, did you choose number 44 at Emerson because of Robert Williams?
I am significantly older than Robert Williams.
But he's a Time Lord, so actually he might have been
it's true. He might have been on if you watch The Good Place, the Jeremy Burmy, like he might have been at the dot of the I when I was in at Emerson. No, you want to know how I chose number 44? Derek Coleman.
Ooh.
Yeah. When I was in high school, and so when I was in high school, Syracuse was just dominating. It was like the Ronnie Cycli. So Derek Coleman, like, he was just a god. And I played the 4, the 5. And I went with DC. But then he got to the Nets and he was just so disappointing because I thought he was going to be the best power forward ever. And he just kind of was lazy. So I always resented Derek Coleman for being so good in college that he made me choose his number. And then in the pros, just kind of like being like lazy. And
who was his signature shoe by? Was it like,
oh man,
it's like some bad company.
Reebok?
I don't think it was. I thought it might not have been FIFA. It might have been like LA Gear or something at this point.
I don't remember.
I'll Google it. I seem to recall that the Derek Coleman signature shoe was, maybe I'm mixing him up with something, but I vaguely recall being like, why is this a shoe brand? Like, why does anyone have a Derek Coleman shoe? I'm gonna have to go back there. If it's not him, I can figure out who it was. But
yeah, the thing with Derek Coleman was he basically walked into the Nets after being in trouble and gave them a blank check and just fill it out at the end of the season. Like that type of attitude, I was like so disappointed in. I'm like, oh man, I loved you, man. What happened to you?
Well, I didn't expect this to end on a sour note, but now you can just spin it. Like I said, just tell everybody you picked it because you knew Robert Williams would be much better in the future.
Right. I had a vision of Robert Williams.
Well, don't we all? All right. I need everybody to go like, subscribe, check us out on our YouTube page. I need you to go check out Karalis' pod over on the Locked On network, and check him out at Boston Sports Journal, his new digs. Go subscribe, check out his work. It's always good stuff. Let's see. Do you think we'll be podcasting 11 years from now, 2033?
Probably, but through like microchips implanted in our heads.
I look forward to it. Well,
that's so much easier.
I mean, it would be like, I get a lot of like stuff I got to set up for these Zoom calls now. So like, it would be much easier if we could just microchip
telepathically, like just hit the button and just start like.
Yeah, but we probably would have said that in 2010, and really we really haven't evolved all that much, except that your internet is far more stable than it was back then. So
yeah, that's true.
All right, everybody, go check out everything from John. We'll catch you next time on the Celtics Talk Podcast.